Well, it looks like it's that time of year again, spooky season, which means a spooky video is in order to be made. Halloween is still the only holiday I actually celebrate, and has been my favorite holiday for as long as I can remember. I love the whole spooky atmosphere that Halloween invokes, and with the spooky season being here, what other better way to celebrate but with indie horror games. Another year, another round of indie horror games. Yes, I just used the same exact intro as I did last year, so fuck you. Last year we took a look at some of the most classic indie horror games, which included Spooky's House of Jump Scares, Night Blight, and Among the Sleep. However, originally a different game was planned instead of Among the Sleep. Going back to the year 2015, one of the most popular types of video on YouTube was taking a look at Fnaf fan games. Some of the most popular included games like Five Nights at Chuck E. Cheese, One Night at Flumpty's 2, a few of the Five Nights at Sonic games came out, some of the Five Nights at Wario's games, and Five Nights in Anime. Ugh. But around this time, a different genre of FNAF game started to gain popularity, that being FNAF clones, with a little game called Jomgigy in Escape from the Planet of the Poltroid, a FNAF parody game. And the next year in 2016, we would get games like Case Animatronics and The Dolls, both of which Scott had to step in and deal with in some way. However, returning to 2015, there was a pretty popular FNAF clone that came out before the other two that seemed to completely go under Scott's radar, well, legal-wise. That game, of course, being Boogeyman. Developed by Clockwork Wolf, Boogeyman is one of those games that is nothing more than a hazy memory until someone, like me, brings it up. However, for those who don't know, Boogeyman is a game where you play as a small child, defending yourself from the aforementioned titular Boogeyman. Also, going back to Jomgigy for a second, upon making this video, I learned that that game actually came out 6 days after Boogeyman did, which is a wild coincidence to me, because I completely forgot about that game before, again, working on this video. Anyway, the Boogeyman franchise, yes franchise, spans 3 games, Boogeyman 1 being released in 2015, Boogeyman 2 in 2017, and the final and third one in 2023. This video will be an in-depth coverage of Boogeyman 1, 2, and 3 as we explore just how different each of these Boogeymans really are from one another, and how much each games differ. Will they improve, or will they decline in quality like most series? Well, there's only one way to find out. Stay tuned. So, get your bowl of candy and your pumpkin spice latte as we look at a hidden gem that is the Boogeyman series. But before we begin, go down there, hit that like and subscribe button, helps me out a lot more. Do you think it's free? It only takes 5 seconds to do. And share this video with everyone and anyone you can. My goal is to eventually hit 100K, so if you want to be part of that, you know what to do. Also, enter cliche subscriber chat here, yada yada yada. With that all being said, sit back, relax, turn those lights off, as this Halloween we explore the forgotten FNAF clone, Boogeyman. Stay tuned while watching the Expert After. Now, to get this out of the way as soon as possible, despite this video being called the Forgotten FNAF clone, I don't think the Boogeyman series is any less of a game series because of it being a FNAF clone. In fact, I think it goes beyond in spite of being a clone of another series. Well, maybe not all of them, but I'll get to that later. And again, the title of this video comes into play as there's something I need to get out of the way, and that's the Boogeyman series is specifically a FNAF clone and not a FNAF fan game. Now, I know that might confuse some people, but a FNAF clone would be a game similar to FNAF, whether it be a homage or just a flat-out copycat. FNAF clones would be standalone games, not connected to FNAF in any way, compared to a FNAF fan game that would be working off the already existing FNAF titles. In layman's terms, a clone aims to replicate, while a fan game is building off the already existing work. However, despite that, I don't think Boogeyman in any way, shape, or form is a malicious attempt to steal the FNAF image, but instead a simple homage compared to the other FNAF clones that are very obviously trying to profit off the FNAF games, like The Dolls and Case Animatronics, which I've already mentioned. Scott had to step in and make both of the developers change some elements. Again, I just had to get that out of the way as soon as possible. Anyway, the way this video is going to work is I'll be covering each of the games fairly in depth, starting with Boogeyman 1 and ending with Boogeyman 3, and I'll give my thoughts on each games as we cover them, while also going over the different aspects of each of the games and how much they differ from each other, because trust me, each of them differ quite heavily from one another. But enough stalling, let's start this video with the original Boogeyman. Being first released on November 2nd, 2015, Boogeyman is the first of 3 Boogeyman games. For those who don't know, Boogeyman is a game very similar to the Fnaf series in a lot of ways, but each of the Boogeyman games still add on their own little spins to the formula. However, despite that, each of these games still draw heavy inspiration from each of the Fnaf games, with Boogeyman 1 specifically being cut from the same cloth as Fnaf 4, with the premise of the game also being rather similar, like having the monsters be afraid of light and you playing as a little kid. The room itself is also pretty similar to Fnaf 4, but again, despite that fact, Boogeyman still has some unique features and ideas of its own. But before we get into those, let's lay out the plot of the game real quick. Well, it's actually rather simple. You, the player, are a little boy defending yourself from the Boogeyman, armed with only a flashlight, which the Boogeyman is afraid of. You have to survive from 12 AM to 6 AM when the sun finally arises. Only then will the Boogeyman stop. Survive 6 nights, plus a 7th Nightmare night, and then ending it off on All Hallows Eve, and that's the premise. However, throughout the game, you'll actually be able to discover different things spread across the house that you'll be able to get to after completing each different night. But we'll save that until later. So, what about the game itself? Well, as the name of the video may imply, Boogeyman is a Fnaf clone, which means you have to survive from 12 AM to 6 AM, defending yourself against the Boogeyman. You do this by flashing him with your flashlight. The Boogeyman will attack you from a few different spots. As each night progresses, the Boogeyman becomes more and more aggressive, always keeping you on your toes. Despite being a Fnaf clone, the only thing that's really similar is the structure of the game, that being multiple different nights and surviving from 12 AM to 6 AM. Other than that, Boogeyman has nothing else to do with Fnaf. There's no doors, there's no cameras, you don't have to wind up a music box, you don't have to lure a Frankenstein bunny away, all you have to do is shine your flashlight at the Boogeyman whenever he shows his face. Now, Boogeyman 1 easily has the most interesting presence, and that's because there's actually about 3 unique versions released of Boogeyman, each changing some rather drastic things. However, the way we're going to tackle Boogeyman in probably its sequels is night by night, starting with night 1 and ending with Halloween. And as each night passes, I'll throw in information about each of the respective games as we move on. So why don't we start with night 1? So hey, this is Ted after recording that. I quickly abandoned that idea because I think it's stupid, so we're just going to be talking about Boogeyman straight through. This is just a little heads up. Night 1 isn't very interesting, so I'm just going to give you the overview of the game and basics. Alright, opening the game and selecting new game, you actually get something rather unique. A difficulty system, which is very interesting for a Fnaf type game. Before the night actually begins, you get this little POV shot, which is presumably the Boogeyman looking in through the window, and eventually crawling into the vent. Now, in the original version 1.0, you actually get a little note telling you how to play the game. To sum it up, basically, it just tells you that the Boogeyman has 4 ways of entering the room: the closet, window, vent, and door, with each different entryway having a unique sound. So, just like with Fnaf 4, the best way to play Boogeyman, and the only way to survive, is to use your ears. One of the biggest caveats to surviving the night is that your flashlight has a battery, and this battery is pretty scarce, and on later nights drains incredibly quickly, meaning every time you flash your light, it has to be with purpose. However, there's a way you can combat this: checking under your bed for a new battery. This comes with a handful of its own problems. One, while under the bed, you can't flash the Boogeyman, meaning if he creeps into the room while you're busy checking under the bed, he can cover some pretty good ground, and by the time you get up, it may be too late. Another problem is sometimes the Boogeyman will be waiting under the bed for you. The way you can tell if he's under the bed is by listening for breathing. Now, the breathing is honestly rather obvious, and in fact is so loud it drowns out some of the other noises from the other entryways. There's 3 different batteries you can gain from under the bed. One will give you a small amount, the second one will give you half, and the third one will give you full. However, there's also a chance that you may get no battery at all, so it's always playing with your head with a sniper watching you. One slip up and it's game over. On top of the small amount of battery life you get, you also have to worry about the different distractions, as sporadically throughout the night, the Boogeyman will start messing around with the stuff in your room, trying to distract you. Whether it be activating your toys, knocking out the lights, or just summoning a storm out of nowhere, the Boogeyman will try to distract you long enough for him to creep into the the room. Speaking of the boogeyman, as I implied many times, is the main antagonist of the series, and the main threat you'll have to defend yourself from. The boogeyman can enter your room from 4 different unique spots. In order to keep him at bay, you must flash him with your light. However, there's a bit of an extra step. Some spots like the window and vents will have 2 phases, one where he'll be opening it, and the second phase being him crawling in or out respectively. Once one of these entryways have been opened, they cannot be closed. This is bad because once they've been opened, they don't make a sound, meaning the boogeyman can slither his way in undetected. There's a lot of interesting things about the boogeyman itself that we'll get to on the later nights, as it's revealed to us more and more as each night passes on, so we'll save it until then. But other than that, there's nothing more to say about night 1. It's a pretty simple night 1, as all night 1s in all Fnaf games are. Well, except the 4th one, but we all know how that went.
Okay, so the first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through.
To be honest, I think the gameplay of Boogeyman is actually really fun. While it's not the most difficult thing out there, it's definitely more engaging compared to the other Fnaf fan games, and that's mostly because the Boogeyman, in a way, is pretty intelligent. A big example of this being when he fully opens either the vent, window, or door. Because those are opened, they don't make a sound, so you would assume he would favor those entryways. But he doesn't, because that'd be too predictable. And going back to the fact that fully opened entryways don't make a sound, he will abuse them, especially on the later nights when he attacks a lot faster, opening entryways a lot faster. At the beginning of Halloween mode, you won't have a chance to flash all of him at once, meaning most of your entryways are going to be permanently open, which adds a lot of difficulty that would normally not be there. I think Boogeyman's gameplay loop is pretty decent all things considered, and is a lot more engaging than the first Five Nights game, and that's due in large part to the constant changing in the environment. Throughout each of the 5 nights, the weather outside will change, either being stormy, snowy, or foggy. This also creates a lot of noise, making it very difficult to hear the Boogeyman. Same thing with the distractions. The Boogeyman periodically throughout each of the nights will start messing with the toys in your room, turning them on, dropping them off the shelves, and many more, all in an attempt to distract you. There's a lot of visual and audible distractions throughout each of the nights that differ severely depending on difficulty and how far you are in the night, as the closer you are to 6 AM, the more frequent the Boogeyman will attack and send out distractions, which really makes you stay on your toes because if not, you're going to get killed. The gameplay loop, especially on the later nights, actually gets really fun because the Boogeyman is attacking almost every second. You're always engaged compared to the series that inspired Boogeyman. One problem I do have with the gameplay loop is the fact that it's pretty similar throughout each of the nights, as on night 1 he can attack from every entryway besides under the bed, which doesn't get introduced until night 6. Other than that, I think the gameplay loop is fantastic, and is a lot more replayable compared to, again, the original 5 nights. After completing each night, you are thrown into this free roam section, where you can explore the rest of the house. Now, honestly, the free roam sections are some of my favorite parts in the game, and in a lot of cases is more scary compared to the actual main gameplay, because just like the main gameplay, you aren't safe. The Boogeyman will also hunt you down throughout the house as well. Throughout the house, the Boogeyman can attack you in 2 different ways, one being from the overhead vent, which you must avoid if you hear him breathing, or from opening a door too quickly. In order to enter a room, you must open the door. However, there's a chance the Boogeyman might be hiding behind that door. In order to not get killed by him, you have to shut it quick, or else you'll die. If you open the door and he's not there, it's safe to enter. However, sometimes it's pretty difficult to tell if the Boogeyman is there or not, as usually it's only one of his limbs sticking out, whether it be his legs or his claws. Another reason why opening each of these doors is kind of stressful is due to the fact that there's a high probability that you may mess up, leading to a game over. Throughout this little free roam section, you can find a few little collectibles that serve a few different purposes, mostly acting as extra defenses or power-ups to defend yourself from the Boogeyman. These include glow sticks, which provide extra light, a flashbang that will instantly ward off the Boogeyman, while also closing all entryways that he's already opened, and the final one being pills that give you some sort of night vision, granting you this giant green glow, allowing you to see much easier when the Boogeyman inevitably turns out all the lights. However, these items aren't very useful until the later nights, or in general actually. I didn't use them at all even on the later nights because really they're not even that useful besides for Halloween night, because every other night is fairly doable without them. You can find them scattered across the house. There are 4 locations you can explore besides the hallways, of course. One being the bathroom, which is, well, a bathroom, which the boogeyman can crawl in from the window and kill you. The living room, which has a few extra notes within, detailing more of the story going on during the day. It's revealed that you and your family just moved in. The previous owners left in a hurry. Some strange occurrences start to, well, occur, like power acting strangely or hearing crawling in the walls. Every time you finish a night and go back to the living room, a new note is there. It's a small little detail, but I like it due to it adding onto the world building. The developer didn't have to add these, but did to make the world feel more alive. Another thing you can find around the house are cassette tapes, and in the living room is a cassette player. Each of these cassettes detail a story of the previous owners of the house, mainly about their youngest daughter, Alicia. Not to spoil too much about the upcoming story reveals, but Alicia, like you, was targeted by the boogeyman. These tapes are a meeting of Alicia with a psychologist. The psychologist is there because Alicia started hearing voices, one being of a little girl and the other one being of a monster. The monster's voice is obviously the boogeyman. We know this because, well, later on in the nights, the boogeyman will start taunting you. That, and Alicia says the monster tells her it's hungry. However, the girl's voice isn't so obvious. However, I do have a theory later on, but we're gonna have to wait until the next game, so keep that in the back of your mind. Anyway, the voice tells her to stay up during the night and to sleep during the day so the boogeyman can't get her. Now, there's actually a different set of tapes that will play during the night that are of Alicia and her older sister, Elle. Most of these tapes consist of Elle being mean to Alicia, either for being up when she's not supposed to or keeping her up. While at first it may just seem like Alicia's being a jerk, that's just how older siblings are, and in fact Elle is rather useful, giving Alicia a flashlight to defend herself from the boogeyman, and even gets in bed with her to make Alicia feel better. Unfortunately, that still won't save her from some unforeseen consequences, but again, we'll get into that much later. You can also explore the kitchen/dining room. This room won't be important until much later on, but I'm still going to talk about it because, well, there's not much to talk about. It's just the dining room. The only other thing to note here is that there's a small vent in the kitchen that if you get too close to, the boogeyman will kill you. Honestly, most of the time when I explore the kitchen, I half expect to see the boogeyman sitting there eating cereal or something. Now that might sound like a joke, but trust me, there are weirder things you can catch the boogeyman doing, but I think we'll save that until the end of the game. And the last room is a closet, which almost always has items in it like cassettes or power-ups inside. However, the entire time you've been exploring the downstairs area, you may have noticed some weird occurrences. Things like TVs being turned on, boxes falling over, or just a very uneasy vibe throughout. And that's not just because the boogeyman is watching you. There's another threat you have to watch out for, that being the ghost of one of the boogeyman's past victims. Periodically, while exploring the downstairs or upstairs, she'll walk by either of the hallways, and all you have to do is simply stay out of her way. When she's passing the top hallway, all you really need to do is, again, stay out of her way. However, if she's crawling from the bottom, she'll also start to ascend the stairs before crawling into one of the walls. Now, the ghost girl will also appear during some of the nights, who, if looked at for too long, will kill you. Kind of a Golden Freddy in Fnaf 2 kind of thing. But other than that, this character isn't too noteworthy. They're just a fun little Easter egg / threat you have to deal with, and just kind of adds onto the unsettling atmosphere of exploring the house alone. Now, there's one more place you can actually visit, that being the basement. The caveat being, if you go into the basement, you are locked inside, then the boogeyman will crawl out of the vent and inevitably kill you. But later on, after completing one of the nights, you can visit the basement without being killed, but we'll save that until the end. So why do you need to be exploring the house every night? Well, to find your flashlight. The entire reason why these free roam sections were added was so you can find a flashlight that you can use to defend yourself from the boogeyman, and after collecting your flashlight and heading back upstairs, you can start the next night. Speaking of why the free roam sections were added, these sections weren't actually in the initial release of Boogeyman. In fact, they weren't released until a few months later when Boogeyman 2.0 came out. This leads me to our next talking point, that being the many versions of Boogeyman. There are 3 main updates released for Boogeyman, the first one being Boogeyman 1.0, which was released on November 2nd, 2015, when it was first released. released. Boogeyman 2.0 was released on January 29th, 2016, and the biggest one being Boogeyman 3.0, released on April 26th, 2016. Each update added a fairly good chunk of new content. 2.0 introduced the free roaming aspect, a difficulty system, and the items scattered across the house, and Boogeyman 3.0 introduced 5 new distractions, 5 new ways of the Boogeyman attacking, overhauled some of the animations, and in general polished the layout of the house, even adding a light to the closet. But it also introduced one of the worst changes, but we'll get to that in a minute. Each of these different versions of Boogeyman are so interesting because they added a much needed change to an otherwise standard Fnaf clone, because when Boogeyman was first released, all it was the 7 different nights, one after another. It didn't originally ship with the in-between free roam sections. Because of that, it really wasn't worth the money, even though it was just $5, because for the same amount, you could get the original 5 Nights game. However, with the release of Boogeyman 2.0, I think that $5 price point became a lot more justifiable, as the free roam sections alone make it a lot more interesting than the original 5 Nights at Freddy's, and by a long shot at that. It's kind of hard to imagine this game without the free roam sections, and in fact I remember it vividly the day it was added, and it was hype. Same thing with the release of 3.0, except for one glaring issue. So I've been using footage from the most recent update, Update 3.1, which is a bit of a problem because, well, it didn't used to look like this. It used to look something like this. Now, there's a pretty big difference that may not be very obvious to you, so I'm going to show you footage of the free roam section in Boogeyman 2.0, then show you the same section only after the release of 3.0. Tell me if you can see the difference.
But like, I would always make...
Still don't know the difference? Well, look at Boogeyman himself.
But like, I would always make...
Still nothing? Well, here's a different clip showing the Boogeyman's full model. I apologize for using this clip of all clips, but it's the only footage of the Boogeyman's full model that isn't completely cast in darkness. And with that, you can see what I mean. With the release of Boogeyman 3.0, the developer of the game completely changed the Boogeyman's design, going from this quite frankly frightening creature to some deformed alien. The Boogeyman's design present in the initial release and 2.0 is the best in the series, having a genuinely creepy design, and it's that same design I used for the thumbnail of this video, because God knows I wasn't using the fucking alien one. Version 1.0 and 2.0's Boogeyman design is generally really great, and is overall just a fantastic horror design in general. He does look like a Boogeyman. However, the 3.0 update design is not good. While, spoiler, it's not the worst in the series, it's definitely the second worst. It still looks very awful, and you can see why very well comparing both of the dancing Easter eggs. The model just looks gross, and not in the scary gross, but in the awfully modeled gross. His head is too big, his feet and hands are far too cartoonish, he's caked up for some reason, and easily the worst part is his face. I really don't know what Barry was going for with this design. Did he try to make it less scary? More scary? Was the original model too realistic for him? Because I can't stress this enough. The original model was so much better than this new one, to a laughable degree. And I know it seems like a small thing to get hung up on, but it's not, because it's less scary than the original, which in a horror game, you don't want it to be less scary, you want it to be more scary, and this just simply isn't. It looks like some fucking deformed alien. It's awful. The other Boogeyman designs are far better, well, besides the last one, but I'll save that until later. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's... No, I'm sorry, but I'm still stuck on this design. It's so bad. Why did they change it? The eyes were perfect on the original model. The new model permanently has its mouth hung open, which looks stupid as fuck. The jump scare is god-awful, and overall brings the experience of the game down as a whole. While I still think the original model is the best in the series, this model is just... I can't get over how bad it really is. The more realistic proportions of the original model were easily the creepiest part about it. While this newer model has some awfully cartoonish proportions, it's Okay, I think I'm done. I don't want to make it seem like I don't like this game or think the developer did a horrible job. It's just I can't wrap my head around the decision when making the new model. It's just not good. And it's not because the developer is bad at making models/games, because the Boogeymans in the newer titles look far better, and as I stated multiple times, the older model looks better too. I guess he did it in part due to the changing of the rest of the house and graphics as a whole, so I guess he wanted to update the Boogeyman's model as well to fit with those. Other than that, the different versions don't differ too much gameplay-wise, as it's still basically flashing the Boogeyman to make him go away, although they did add a few new ways for him to attack. Originally, the Boogeyman could only attack from the vent, window, hallway door, and closet, while also having an attack from looking under the bed at the wrong time. However, now on the later nights, he can swipe from under the bed, knocking you off, which of course results in a game over. The update log says he has 10 new attacks, which I can only think of 6 attacks. Maybe I'm dumb, I don't really know. Actually, now that I think about it, it's probably him being able to attack in multiple ways from the same entryway, like in the closet, where instead of crawling on the floor, sometimes he'll crawl on the ceiling. But again, other than that, the core gameplay is still practically the same. Moving on to the next point, how popular of a game was Boogeyman? I mean, it had to be somewhat popular, I remember it, and some of you may as well. But was it really that popular? Well, actually, it quite was. Boogeyman was actually rather popular when it first came out, being picked up by YouTubers like Corey X Kingston, 8-Bit Ryan, or 8-Bit Gaming at the time, D-Live, Fusion Z Gamer, and Markiplier, which you bet I watched all 4 of them play through the game multiple times each. However, easily the YouTuber I watched play this game the most was 8-Bit Gaming, as every time a new update came out, they would play through the entire game, showing off the new features, which made them more unique because, well, the other YouTubers didn't really. Well, at least the others I watched. Besides Corey, who I think made one more video on update 3.2, if you wanted a full comprehension of each of the different new updates, 8-Bit Gaming was the route to take. Going back to the popularity of this game, it was quite popular, especially for a Fnaf clone. While all the YouTubers who played the game obviously recognized the fact that it was a Fnaf clone, but it still stood out among the rest, and even among some of the most popular Fnaf fan games. And most of the YouTubers who played it seemed to really enjoy it and saw potential in it, and most of them even returned for the sequel, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Boogeyman, when it first came out, really felt like something special, especially in the Fnaf sphere, as Boogeyman came out only a few months after Fnaf 4, and because it was actually very scary, well, the original version, it really felt like a breath of fresh air in the Fnaf community, especially around the time, and it truly felt like the YouTubers who did play it had a really good time doing so, particularly 8-Bit Gaming, which, as I already mentioned, played the game multiple times in full. Boogeyman, when it first came out, actually felt like something special compared to the other Fnaf games / Fnaf clones coming out around the time, which would just recycle already existing elements of already existing Fnaf games or already existing fan games. On top of that, these videos all did pretty well, while also being pretty nostalgic. Corey's playthrough in particular always stuck with me. In fact, I associate Corey with Boogeyman more than I associate him with Fnaf, as I've never seen Corey's playthrough of any of the Fnaf games. I did see him play through the fan-made Fnaf 3 years ago, but never any official Fnaf game. Anyway, one thing that wasn't communicated very well from watching a video of Boogeyman and actually playing it for yourself is the difficulty, or non-existent difficulty, which leads me to our next point. Difficulty. I think I made it quite obvious that Boogeyman isn't very difficult. Quite frankly, it's laughably easy, but then again, no Fnaf game is actually very difficult until, like, Ultra Custom Mode or whatever the fuck people call it nowadays. Actually, I think it's called Golden Freddy Mode in the second game. Whatever. Anyway, the point is, Boogeyman doesn't get very difficult until the later nights. And when I say later nights, I mean Nightmare Night and Halloween, which themselves are very doable with enough perseverance. A lot of it stems from, well, a few reasons. 1, the Boogeyman doesn't attack very often. 2, the battery is actually quite generous if you're not a fucking idiot shining it for 1,000 years like YouTubers do when they freak out. And 3, there's barely even a difficulty curve. Now, may I remind you, this is on max difficulty. The footage you are watching right now is set on hard, and to be honest, that's not a knock to the developer. Obviously, not every game needs to be difficult. In fact, not every Fnaf game needs to be difficult. I will give Boogeyman credit as it's more difficult than the original Fnaf, but other than that, it's not very difficult, with the main reason being the battery lasting way too long. My first attempt of Nightmare Night, I got to 2 AM with almost a full battery, and on night 6 I made it through the entire night with a full battery. The problem is, when you see YouTubers play Boogeyman, when they hear even a slight noise, they tend to panic and keep the light on, which drains it very quickly. However, if you're simply just flashing the Boogeyman as you are intended to do, it doesn't drain very quickly. In fact, from night 1 to night 6, I didn't have to change the battery at all. Now, not being difficult is not a hit to my enjoyment of Boogeyman. Not every game needs to be super difficult. If that was the case, not a single soul on this planet would enjoy games developed by Nintendo. And there's a lot of easy games that I enjoy playing, I just prefer more difficult games. Obviously not Dark Souls level of difficulty, but still a bit challenging. As I did mention, Boogeyman does start to get more difficult during Nightmare Night and Halloween, and oh boy does the difficulty get jacked up. There's a lot to deal with on these 2 nights. The constant distractions, the constant weather changes, the Boogeyman attacking at lightning speed, worrying about the Boogeyman trying to get you from under the bed, your battery. It's a lot to handle, but again, it's very doable with enough time and patience. Now, I guess we should talk a little bit about the story. I already talked about it a little bit a few minutes ago, but there's still a lot to go over. Boogeyman actually has some interesting beats in its story. While it's not very fleshed out, in fact there's still a lot we don't know, there's still plenty there to talk about. All we really know is that the previous owners left after an encounter with the Boogeyman, and the previous owner's daughter also having to defend herself from the Boogeyman every night. There's also another thing we learn, and that's the Boogeyman actually killed the previous owner's daughter, Elle. If you remember back to when I was talking about Alicia, I mentioned the fact that her oldest sister was kind of being a jerk. During one of these attempts at being a jerk, she opens the window only to get grabbed by the Boogeyman, and on night 6 we can hear these events transpire.
Probably just a bird or something. Don't go near the window. What are you doing? Don't open it out. See, it's fine. Nothing's out here. It'll be that stupid owl again. Let her go. Let her go, please. Please let her.
During this night after this tape recording, we also learned something else from the Boogeyman himself. The Boogeyman chillingly reveals that there's more than one of them. Now, at first, it may seem like he's talking about there's more than one Boogeyman attacking you, which, yes, is the truth, but he also means that quite literally, but I'll explain that later on when we talk about Boogeyman 2, as there's quite literally more than one of them. Now, there's actually something pretty interesting about the Boogeyman series, and that's the fact when he kills someone, they actually become a new Boogeyman, which is really fucking strange, meaning yes, Elle did become both the ghost and the new Boogeyman, as explained by Alicia. After completing Nightmare Night and Halloween mode, you get an additional phone call at the end, as the credits start to roll, from Alicia telling you, Thomas, that you need to talk, which never goes anywhere. Cool. The last thing we're going to be talking about for Boogeyman is the Easter egg you can find. Going back to the basement, you can actually survive this encounter with the Boogeyman. In order to do this, you have to complete night 6, and in the kitchen, you can find a battery. This will then allow you to turn the flashlight on and go into the basement and scare the Boogeyman away. Within the basement, you can find the stone wall, which needs a stone slab to be entered in. Go back upstairs, enter a code into this door, and then you'll get a stone slab. Going down to the basement again, entering the stone slab into the stone wall, you get this. It's a pretty funny little Easter egg that was everywhere when it was first discovered, and in fact, in all Boogeyman since 2.0, there's been some sort of dancing Boogeyman Easter egg hidden somewhere in the game, which I find really funny. But other than that, that was Boogeyman. Boogeyman was definitely a very interesting game. While I've seen other FNAF fan games do more impressive things and have generally better gameplay, I think Boogeyman sticks out a lot more compared to most FNAF clones and fan games, simply due to the atmosphere and the premise. I didn't mention this when I was actually discussing my thoughts about Boogeyman, but the idea of a FNAF clone being centered around the Boogeyman is very genius, and in my opinion did what FNAF 4 was going for a lot better. That being, well, a game about the Boogeyman. Boogeyman isn't the most difficult or impressive game, but I still think it's a really good indie horror game that if you haven't played, you definitely should go out of your way just to do so. And spoiler alert, this will easily be the best out of the series, but does that mean the sequels are terrible? Well, let's find out as we move on to Boogeyman 2. Being first released on February 7th, 2017, Boogeyman 2 is on next up, and to get this out of the way as soon as possible, I couldn't get footage for this game, and that's because these games are optimized like complete dog shit. Not to be rude to the developer, but these games do not run well, especially when you're recording them. There's constant bugs, constant frame rate drops, and a bunch of other unruly shit. So for this game and this game alone, I'm unfortunately going to have to use footage already available on YouTube like how I used to. But the other two games, the footage is in fact mine, so a little heads up. Boogeyman 2 is very similar to Boogeyman 1 and adds no real new gimmicks or anything. In fact, it even removes the free roam sections, which at first may seem like a big turnoff, but instead it adds a few more new things to make the main gameplay more exciting, I guess. Boogeyman 2 adds a lot more ways for the Boogeyman to attack and is far harder compared to the original. However, does this change save Boogeyman 2? Well, let's find out. Boogeyman 2 is strange. Like I just mentioned a minute prior, it's identical to the original except with a few more ways for the Boogeyman to attack you. And unlike with the original Boogeyman, almost every night a new entryway is thrown into the ring, which we'll get to in a minute. Let's talk about the story this time around, and somehow it's even less than the original. Our main storyteller, because Alicia is absent, is this doll. Now, this doll will actually be a key aspect in understanding the Boogeyman this time, as she introduces you to most of the Boogeyman's lore and motives. When starting night 1, the doll tells you that she's there to help defend you from the Boogeyman. She teaches you the basics like how the Boogeyman is afraid of light. The doll then sends you to get the flashlight sitting on the shelf over there, and once you hop back in bed, you start night 1. Now, as I already mentioned multiple times, Boogeyman 2 is similar to the original, where you're stuck in a room and have to defend yourself from the Boogeyman. He'll come from the vent, window, closet, and door. However, as each night passes on, he'll actually come from a different entryway, but for right now, he only comes from those 4. One thing I like about Boogeyman 2 compared to Boogeyman 1 is that the Boogeyman is a lot more active even on night 1, which makes it a lot more engaging compared to the original. While the original had more content, Boogeyman 2 has a lot more replay value, not only being more difficult but also having, in my opinion, a better gameplay loop, due to the Boogeyman attacking far more often than he did in the original. Unfortunately, Boogeyman 2 did remove the free roam sections, which was my favorite part of the original, and instead reverts to how it was when it was initially released, all the way back in 2015, where it has you sitting through each of the nights back to back with a little cutscene in between sometimes. While it's not a massive turnoff, it's still a little disappointing, but I do get why it was changed, because it'd be way too similar to the original, more than it already is. And I think it would take away from buying the sequel, because other than the few new entryways and difficulty curve, it's practically the same, except not really. While the gameplay loop might be similar, the graphics have gotten a massive overhaul, looking a lot better compared to the original, and the Boogeyman himself even got a redesign, adorning a fedora and trench coat with long hair, going for a Freddy Krueger look, specifically from A New Nightmare. Honestly, I do really like this design, not more than the original, but definitely a lot more than the 3.0 version. And there's actually an in-universe explanation on why he looks different in this game, but that's going into spoiler territory, so we'll save that until later. Just keep it in the back of your mind. You know, I just realized how much I bring up something just to tell you to remember it for later in these videos. Man, I really need to get better at making these scripts. Anyway, I think this design works a lot more in comparison to the room that surrounds him, and especially when shrouded in darkness. In my opinion, I think this design fits a lot more as a Boogeyman design compared to the original. While I do really like the original a lot more than this one, this Boogeyman design really just just feels like the boogeyman more than any other design in any of the games. In a way, it also kind of takes away from the mystique of the original design, whereas the original design, it wasn't super clear that this creature coming after you was supposed to be the boogeyman. If you didn't know that this game was, well, a boogeyman game beforehand. It was a lot more unique compared to the pretty standard boogeyman design of the second game, but it doesn't mean I don't like it still, because I still think it's a solid design overall, just a little less unique compared to the original. Returning to the gameplay itself, Boogeyman 2 in a lot of ways is a step up from the original, and one of the biggest aspects being atmosphere. The atmosphere this time around is a lot more dark and brooding. While the walls of the room may be pink, that doesn't take away from when all the lights are turned off, the darkness that engulfs you. Boogeyman 2 is a lot more scary than the original was. One of the biggest aspects of that being the fact that the Boogeyman is a lot closer to you than the original, especially the closet, as when he comes out of the closet, he's merely a few feet away from you. I feel like Boogeyman 2 was made specifically to fix a lot of the problems the original had, hence why the free roam aspects were removed. Not because they were problems, but because they didn't need any fixing. They were near perfect as is. But the base gameplay itself needed a few fixes, like the speed, atmosphere, and general scariness overall, which the sequel definitely improved upon. Now, easily the most interesting part about the sequels is all the new ways the Boogeyman can attack you. The original Boogeyman had approximately 6 ways for the Boogeyman to attack you: the vent, the hallway door, the closet, and the window, and under the bed, with under the bed having 2 varieties. One where he's chilling under there until you look under, and the second one having him swipe you off, all of which return in the sequel. However, all of them have been updated in quite some interesting ways, adding some variety to it, like when he opens the vent completely, instead of just attacking you, he'll drop to the floor near you. If you flash him, he'll go under the bed and try to swipe you off. Now, under the bed has also been changed quite a bit. Instead of looking under the bed for batteries, you now have a battery charger at your nightstand that you'll need to use to charge your batteries, obviously. But doing this will also put you at a disadvantage because while charging your batteries, you can't flash the Boogeyman. So now under the bed is just exclusively a way for him to attack you. But unlike the original where the Boogeyman made a breathing sound or a sheet crinkling sound when he's ready to attack, this time he doesn't. Well, he does, but it's extremely faint. So this time around, you actually get a partner, that being this fucking scary ass dog that gets this intense introduction. Upon starting night 4, the doll will tell you that something with big claws, fangs, and fur, who is also hungry, is coming. The lights turn off, scratching begins, and before anything happens, the dog comes strolling in only to plop itself on the bed. Now, I don't think the Boogeyman starts attacking you from under the bed until night 5, so this dog is just here as simply a distraction for now, to make you paranoid. Whenever the dog starts barking, that signifies an attack from the Boogeyman from below. He can either come from the left or the right, and you'll have to determine that for yourself by flashing either side. This is a bit of a gamble because you have to waste some battery. Despite it only being one flash, that one flash might be the difference between living the night and brutally perishing. But he also has a few more unique ways of entry exclusive to this game alone, and all of them are a lot more scary compared to the base 5 entryways. The first new entryway you'll notice is the tent. In the corner of the room is a nice tent. Once the lights go out, the Boogeyman on night 4 will start crawling from the tent, and he's rather fast as he's right next to the bed. That's another thing Boogeyman 2 added, different speeds for each of the different entryways. Depending on what entryway the Boogeyman is attacking from, he'll be either faster or slower depending on what entryway he's actually coming from. Now, this usually isn't in your favor. Like I just mentioned, the tent is right next to you, so you'll have less time to react to an oncoming attack, unless you're paying attention or you hear the floorboards creak, which wasn't in the original. When Boogeyman attacked in the original, sometimes his animations would be slowed, or he'd be crawling slowly towards you just so the attacks would have the same amount of time, which really made the original core gameplay become stale for the first few nights. That's something that Boogeyman 2 thankfully fixed. Another new attack has to do with the door to the hallway. If the door is left completely open, the Boogeyman upon entering will hide behind the wall, stalling time so you can't instantly flash him. I think this attack is a lot more creepier compared to him walking in from the door, because the only thing you can see most of the time is just his eyes peering through the darkness from around the corner. The benefit to this is because it's so dark and all you can see is his eyes, is this attack is a lot more slower compared to some of the other ones, and the final entryway he can attack you from is coming coming from the other window. Periodically, the curtain will start to shift and he'll walk out. And the worst part is about this attack is I'm pretty sure it's completely silent, making it even more difficult compared to the other entryways, but that's in my opinion a good thing. As I stated multiple times already, the difficulty of the original wasn't up to par, with this one being far more difficult, which is amped up even more on later nights like Night 6, Nightmare, and Halloween, where the boogeyman can attack you at the same exact time from multiple entryways. That's because, just like the original on Night 4, it's revealed that there's more than one boogeyman, only this time it's explained as him splitting his soul into multiple pieces as a desperate attempt to get to you. And especially on the later nights like Halloween night and Nightmare night, it becomes so incredibly overwhelming to the point where every entryway will be permanently opened, which is even more difficult because when an entryway is opened, they don't make a sound anymore. And when you lose all your sound indicators, you have to rely purely on visual indicators, which becomes very difficult when he turns out all the lights. That was present in the original, however, this time around, because it's a lot more difficult and because you can attack at the same exact time through multiple entryways, it becomes a lot easier just to give up and let him fully open an entryway. And that really just sums up my entire opinion of Boogeyman 2. It's a far more difficult version of Boogeyman 1, and despite me saying the original release of Boogeyman 1 wasn't worth it due to it simply being night after night like every other FNAF fan game, I think Boogeyman 2 exceeds despite that. While Boogeyman 1 is great because of the free roam sections, Boogeyman 2 is great because it improves upon the original tenfold. And the only reason why I like the original more is because of those free roam sections were so well done and were made so scary. With every time you turning the corner, it felt like either the boogeyman or the ghost patrolling the hallways would be there waiting for you, and in some cases they would be. It was a lot more scary and put the player on edge more compared to the core gameplay. However, with Boogeyman 2, it's the gameplay that's a lot more scary this time around, due to the intensity of the gameplay loop. From Night 5 and onwards, there's barely a moment you get where the boogeyman isn't attacking you. You barely get a moment to breathe. You always have to stay on your feet or the boogeyman will kill you. It's so hectic, and that's why I love it so much. It's so well done. While I think Boogeyman 1 is still my favorite due to the free roam sections, Boogeyman 2 definitely has the best core gameplay out of any of the Boogeymans. There's more ways for him to attack, there's more distractions, the graphics are better, it's faster paced, there's less downtime, it's everything you want in a horror game sequel. Well, it's not the most perfect sequel as there's still a lot of bugs, it's optimized like dog shit, and the sound design at times can only be described as nails on a chalkboard, and the jump scares are also still pretty mediocre. But other than that, I think Boogeyman 2 is a worthy sequel to its predecessor. While there are things I think Boogeyman 1 did better than the sequel, none of them apply to the core gameplay. Despite that fact, I still think Boogeyman 2 is a really good horror game that you should go out of your way to play if you haven't already this Halloween. And for those wondering, yes, I still think Boogeyman 2 is better than most Five Nights games, just to throw that out there. So what about that spoiler I was talking about earlier? You know, the one about the Boogeyman looking different. Well, after beating Nightmare Night, the doll reveals to you that the Boogeyman was trying to attack your little brother in the next room over, using one of his weaker souls. That weaker soul she's talking about is the Boogeyman from the original, meaning yes, Boogeyman 1 and 2 occur simultaneously with each other, which in my opinion I think is really cool. While the doll mentions the fact that she doesn't know if he survived or not, he clearly does, as at the end of the Boogeyman 1, you get a call from Alicia telling you that you guys need to talk, which again doesn't go anywhere. So how was this game's present compared to the original? Well, barely even a fraction of it. The biggest YouTubers who played the original didn't even come back. Markiplier didn't return, but that's a given as he doesn't usually return for sequels for games like this, and Corey made one video and just dropped it after that. However, DLive, 8-Bit Gaming, and Fusion Z Gamer all returned, and in fact it seemed like a lot more YouTubers played the sequel more than the original, but I might be wrong about that. YouTubers like Darko, Lord Minion 777, Viper the Gamer, Riskgram, and The Goat, Taste Gaming all joined in. In fact, Ryan even played Boogeyman 2 on both 8-Bit Gaming and 8-Bit Ryan, which is strange. What's even stranger is the fact that even though it seems like more YouTubers jumped on the Boogeyman 2 bandwagon than the original, all the YouTubers who returned got less views compared to the original. That's obviously not the case for every YouTuber who played Boogeyman 2, but it was quite a few of them, which is weird because when this game first released, I thought it was even more popular than the original. YouTubers were marketing it as scarier than the original was. It's just strange that there was a pretty large drop-off in viewership compared to the original than the sequel, but that's also not very surprising as Boogeyman came out in 2017. Around this time, a lot more Fnaf fan games were coming out, a lot more better Fnaf fan games were coming out, and that's what grabbed most people's attention, even if they were technically worse than Boogeyman 2. Fnaf fan games were at an all-time high in 2017, and the Boogeyman series viewership didn't stop at the sequel. It also fell off with Frosty Nights, and this trend would continue even more drastically with the release of Boogeyman 3. And when I mean drastically, I mean drastically, as the most popular Boogeyman 3 video released on YouTube currently is by Fusion Z Gamer with only 250,000 views. And he didn't even finish the fucking game, only making one video on it, and the entire time he seems like he wasn't even having fun, which is very apparent why when you play it for yourself. And on top of that, Fusion Z Gamer seems to be the only big YouTuber who returned for Boogeyman 3. D-Live, Ryan, and Baz, Mark, Corey, Taste, Viper, Wade, Riskgram, and Dako never returned. And that's for two big reasons. One, it came out in fucking 2023, which was an awful time to release, as the Boogeyman craze was long past. The reason why Boogeyman 1 worked so well is because when it became popular, it released at a great time. And the second reason why Boogeyman 3 viewership dropped off so much is because it's absolute dog shit, which I suppose we should get to now. Being first released on October 23rd, 2023, Boogeyman 3 is the last installment of the Boogeyman series, and is without a doubt the absolute worst for a number of reasons. What's strangest about Boogeyman 3 to me personally is that it was released in 2023, 8 years after the original. By the time it released, no one cared about Boogeyman anymore. That ship had long sailed, and even the previous game, Frosty Nights, barely got any recognition. This game was such an anomaly to me. I had no idea it even existed until starting work on this video in September of 2025. This game is such an enigma that the most popular video on YouTube is by Fusion Z Gamer with only 250,000 views, and finding any information beyond the Steam page is near impossible. It's almost like this game doesn't even exist. It released to such little fanfare, it's actually embarrassing. Now that's not the fault of the developer. Again, times change, and the Boogeyman series was inevitably going to fall off. It happens to every indie horror game series. But that's not the only thing to drop in the Boogeyman series. The quality also dropped heavily. While visually, obviously it looks better than the other two, gameplay-wise, it's unbelievably awful. You're telling me the same developer who made these two games made this game as well? Get the fuck out of here. It all boils down to three main points: the gimmicks, the gameplay loop, and series fatigue. So let's start with the gameplay loop. Being a Boogeyman game, it obviously practically has the same gameplay loop as the other entries, where when the Boogeyman attacks, you have to shine him with your flashlight to make him go away. Only this time around, it's not as simple as it may seem. One of the main praises I gave to Boogeyman 2 was making the gameplay loop a lot more engaging compared to the original, making it faster and more intense compared to the slower original. And Boogeyman 3 does that again, making the gameplay a lot more fast and intense. Only this time, it's a bit of a detriment more than it is a benefit. And that has to do with one of the biggest gimmicks Boogeyman throws into the ring to quote-unquote freshen up the gameplay, that being the toys. See, this time around, the Boogeyman decided to wise up a bit, and instead of using the toys as distractions, he started actually sending them after you to kill you. The only problem is, these toys aren't as easy to defeat as the Boogeyman himself, as shining a light at them won't do a thing. So how do you defend yourself from the toys? Well, you squirt them with water with your squirt gun. This is also a pretty iffy gimmick in my opinion. You have a limited amount of water you can shoot, and in order to refill your water, you need to reload your gun. This disables the gun for a little bit, not allowing you to shoot it. Now that would be fine and dandy if the toys actually attacked enough for this to be a downside. Even on the hardest night, the toys don't attack fast enough for this to be an issue, because if they did, it would be impossible. Because squirting the toys don't instantly deter them, it only sets them back. In order to deter them completely, you have to squirt them for a good long while. Of course, this all depends on how far the toys have moved, but the gist of it is you have to squirt each of the toys when they begin to move, or else else you'll die. Basically a longer version of flashing the boogeyman, which you also have to do. Now, I actually have a theory on why this was added. See, the developer's previous game also had a gimmick like this. A few minutes ago I mentioned a game called Frosty Nights, which was the developer's previous game. And in that game you weren't defending yourself from the boogeyman, but from Killer Snowman, who you must defeat by using a hairdryer. You also got a flashlight, but the flashlight wasn't used to defend yourself, but merely acts as a light, obviously, because you needed to see the snowman attack you, as this game was a lot more darker than any of the boogeyman games. Also, if you're wondering, no, I'm not gonna give Frosty Nights its own section. I was thinking about doing that originally, but I wanted to stick exclusively to Boogeyman, so sorry, no dice. Although, one interesting thing about Frosty Nights I will mention is the fact that at the end of Nightmare Night, the developer added a little note saying that there would be no more Boogeyman type games, which was obviously a fucking lie. What changed their mind, I have no idea, but whatever it was probably the devil himself. One of the biggest problems I have with the toys is that they can attack whilst the boogeyman is also attacking, who himself can attack from multiple places at once, meaning on the later nights, more often than not, you'll have to deal with 3 threats simultaneously. On top of that, the boogeyman attacks more frequently and faster than he did in the previous games. This entire game can be summed up as a balancing nightmare. However, it is balanced a little bit by, again, making each of the entryway attacks the same length, which is blatantly obvious, especially looking at some of the animations coming from the closet. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? Oh, don't mind me, just smelling the floor. Speaking of Boogeyman himself, this is easily the worst design in the series. While the 3.0 version of Boogeyman's original design is god-awful, this one is just a bad Boogeyman design. While I think this design is generally pretty good, for a Boogeyman design, it's not. And that's because it's not thematically consistent with the other 2 designs. Now, you could say Boogeyman 1 and Boogeyman 2's designs both look nothing like each other, but that was the point. The Boogeyman present in Boogeyman 2 was meant to be the actual Boogeyman himself, while the one present in the first game was a weaker version of him. However, this one looks nothing like neither of them. Now, again, it's a pretty good design generally, but where does this fit? It's just not consistent with the other 2. With the other 2, they were believable to a certain extent to be the same creature. You could look at the designs and say, yep, that's the Boogeyman. You look at this thing and think, what eldritch horror did this thing crawl out of? While I think the design is fine as a design itself, separated from Boogeyman, in motion it looks so goofy. What doesn't help is the fact that he's doing random backflips out of the vent, crawling on the floor like a weirdo, sneaking behind the doors. It's just not very scary. I don't want to judge the developer too hard, as to my knowledge this is a one-man development team, but come on man, this is just not scary. That criticism and a lot of my other criticisms can be chalked up to one main point: series fatigue. At this point before Boogeyman 3, the developer of the Boogeyman series released Boogeyman 1, Boogeyman 2, and Frosty Nights, all games with practically the same gameplay loop. While each of them had different varieties of the loop, it was practically the same thing every time. Point your mouse at the enemy to make them go away. After a while, it just gets boring because you expect the same thing over and over again. And as much as I hate to compliment the Fnaf series, that's something they did well. Each of the different games changed up the gameplay loop while also adding gimmicks and new spins to already existing features. FNAFs 1, 2, 3, and 4 all felt like distinct games from one another. Each of them had a main gimmick that they stuck to. FNAF 1, it was the doors. FNAF 2, it was the mask. FNAF 3, it was the audio. And FNAF 4 was using sound cues. Every FNAF game, to a certain extent, played very differently from one another. And that's what kept them from going stale. That's what kept them fresh. Each of the Boogeyman games don't do that. Boogeyman 2, Frosty Nights, and Boogeyman 3 is practically Boogeyman 1, but with a new coat of paint. Unless the gameplay loop itself is changed, the quality isn't gonna get any better. Speaking of the quality not getting better, despite this game looking technically nicer than the other 2, it's somehow even buggier than the last. While there's a lot less visual bugs, there's a lot more audio bugs. Sometimes audio cues for one of the entryways being open just won't play or will play after you already flashed the Boogeyman. There's a lot of other bugs, like not being able to tell how much battery you have unless you look down, or not being able to accurately tell how much water you have, which I don't know if they count as visual bugs, more like visual oversights and dumbass game design, but the point still stands. It's just an awfully thrown together mess. This game just feels so poorly put together. The audio constantly messed up, the boogeyman's animations are janky as fuck, it's overwhelming but in a bad way, there's just too much happening on screen, and for some reason the fucking mouse sensitivity likes to constantly fluctuate from moving with a brick to moving with a feather. This entire game is just a fucking mess. A mess that I can't even say I ironically enjoyed, because I didn't. It was just a miserable experience throughout. Here, I think my live reaction says enough. It's actually so fucking dumb. One of the weirdest inclusions from the developer was the shop. Before every night or after you die, you'll be thrown into a shop area with this doll. Now, keep this doll in the back of your mind for now, as I'm going to talk about it much later. And when I say much later, I mean, like, in a few seconds, or whatever, you fuck off. This shop is so unbelievably stupid. The way it works is, upon beating a night, you are rewarded with some money that you can use to buy stuff like extra battery charge or power-ups from the previous games, like the energy drink, cherry bomb, and glow sticks. The problem is, once you die or finish a night, things like battery life are carried over from the previous night, meaning you have to spend money in order to refill your battery. This is really fucking stupid. I get why it was added as a way to kind of change up the formula, but it was executed in the most awful of ways. It's a Five Nights clone. It doesn't need to be that deep. The power-ups are also pretty useless, as the flashbang, when I used it, did nothing. Twice. And this fucking doll over here won't shut up. What's even the deal with this fucking doll? Well, in order to get to that, we actually have to go into the story. So, what's the story for Boogeyman 3? Well, as always, you play as a little kid defending yourself from the boogeyman, only this time, Alicia is back, communicating to you over this stupid-ass radio. Throughout each of the nights, she'll tell you different things like how she survived the boogeyman, and how she used to live in the house that you're in now, and then the boogeyman killed her sister, stuff we already know. But an interesting thing is during these little shop sections, where you go to buy whatever the fuck you need because this game was artificially made to make you need things that you don't, whatever, the doll that talks to you sounds very similar to Alicia, and on night 5, it practically confirms that it is Alicia, except she's this doll for some reason. Dude, I don't care that Alicia's dead, I don't care that she's a doll, I don't care that the boogeyman is a little pissy whiny baby about you beating him. This stuff was done 8 years ago. I've seen it already. It's dumb. I don't want to play this game no more. Also, apparently on night 3, a bunch of fucking fog fills the room, but I didn't see it because my graphics were on low, so I can actually record this shit show. Speaking of nights, for some reason the developer made each of the nights painfully slower than the previous, by like double. Each night is now double the time, or something like that. Paired with the boogeyman attacking a lot more frequently, throwing the toys on top of that will also attack you, this game becomes excruciatingly overwhelming. And when you look at the time expecting it to be 4 AM, no, guess what? Fuck you, it's only 1 AM. For some reason, you also get like 20 seconds of freedom. When the clock hits 5:40 AM, the boogeyman disappears. When it's usually 5 seconds before 6 AM, that he disappears in the other games, but whatever, I'm done with this fucking game. So what are my feelings about Boogeyman 3? It's not good. It's far from good. I can't in good faith recommend you go and play this game. While it's the same price as the other two Boogeymans, it's nowhere near the quality of the other two. Boogeyman 3 is an overwhelming, sloppily made shit stain on a so far decent series. From the constant bugs, the poor gameplay loop, to the strange and frustrating game design, I think Boogeyman 3 is an absolute train wreck. A train wreck that nobody acknowledged because nobody cared. And with that, we come to the end of the Boogeyman series. To sum up my feelings about the series in general, I think the Boogeyman series is a very good collection of Fnaf clones, minus the third one. Boogeyman 1 and 2 are some of the most nostalgic, quote-unquote, Fnaf fan games to me, and some of the most nostalgic indie horror games that I've had the pleasure covering on this channel. While it definitely won't be the last, it was definitely the most positive trip down memory lane I've seen thus far. I see the Boogeyman series for what it is, a small, somewhat quality homage to another indie horror game series, and to that degree, I think it exceeds pretty well. However, if you were going into Boogeyman thinking it was some masterpiece or some innovative rival to the Five Nights series, well, you better get yourself a ticket to disappointment. disappointment count because that's just not what it is. Overall, I do recommend you go out of your way to play Boogeyman 1 and 2, and to a certain degree, Frosty Nights as well, as I think they're perfect little horror games for this spooky season. And with that, we have now come to the end of the forgotten FNAF clone, Boogeyman. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.